executives who were directly involved in the Phoenix Project. She pulled out a specific document. This is an email from Mr. Kirk, dated June 15th, 20. Don't want to miss what happens when political accountability meets raw, unfiltered truth. Trust me, what unfolds in the next few minutes will have you glued to your screen. Kirk's hands gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. He had walked into this hearing expecting to deliver his usual talking points about conservative youth engagement and campus free speech. He had not expected Crockett to come armed with what appeared to be internal documents that even some of his board members hadn't seen. "I'm happy to discuss our organization's mission," Kirk started, his voice attempting to maintain its usual broadcast-ready smoothness. But there was a tremor underneath that the microphones picked up clearly. "Oh, we'll get to your mission," Mr. Kirk Crockett replied, pulling out a specific document and holding it up for the cameras to see. "But first, I want to talk about this particular expenditure from March 2023, $347,000 listed as youth engagement activities that somehow ended up at a luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas. Can you explain that?" The room erupted. Committee members from both parties leaned forward. Photographers' cameras clicked rapidly, and Charlie Kirk, the man who had built an empire on quick comebacks and social media zingers, sat there with his mouth slightly open, no words coming out. This was the moment that would define the next 2 hours of testimony. This was the moment when Jasmine Crockett, a first-term congresswoman from Texas, would systematically dismantle one of the most prominent figures in conservative youth politics. And this was the moment when Charlie Kirk would learn that preparation and facts trump rhetoric and talking points every single time. To understand the magnitude of what was about to unfold, you need to understand who these two people were and why this confrontation mattered far beyond the walls of that hearing room. Charlie Kirk had built Turning Point USA from nothing when he was just 18 years old. By 2024, at age 30, he commanded an organization with an annual budget exceeding $80 million zero. He was a regular on Fox News, a close ally of prominent Republican figures, and someone who claimed to speak for millions of young conservatives across America. His organization boasted chapters on over 3,000 college campuses, and his social media reach extended to tens of millions of followers. Kirk had cultivated an image as a sharp-tongued defender of conservative values, someone who could go toe-to-toe with any liberal professor or Democratic politician. His YouTube videos of campus confrontations regularly went viral, showing him supposedly destroying college students with facts and logic. He wore expensive suits, flew on private jets to speaking engagements, and lived a lifestyle that seemed more befitting a Fortune 500 CEO than a youth activist. But there had always been questions, whispers in conservative circles about where all that money really went. Former employees who spoke off the record about lavish spending and questionable practices. Journalists who had tried to dig into Turning Point's finances only to hit wall after wall of legal threats and non-disclosure agreements. Jasmine Crockett was different from Kirk's usual opponents. The representative from Texas's 30th district hadn't come to Congress to play games. A civil rights attorney by training, she had spent years taking on complex cases that required meticulous research and preparation. She didn't do cable news hits for the sound bites. She did them to explain policy. She didn't tweet for the likes. She tweeted to inform her constituents. When she was assigned to the House Oversight Committee, Crockett saw an opportunity to do what she did best, follow the money. And when Turning Point USA's tax-exempt status came up for review, she didn't just prepare, she over-prepared. She had her staff working for months, filing FOIA requests, talking to former employees who had finally decided to break their silence, and piecing together a financial puzzle that painted a very different picture from the one Kirk presented to his donors. The stakes couldn't have been higher. For Kirk, this wasn't just about defending his organization. It was about protecting an empire that had made him wealthy and influential beyond his wildest dreams. If Crockett's allegations stuck, it wouldn't just mean bad press. It could mean IRS investigations, loss of tax-exempt status, and potentially criminal charges for fraud. For Crockett, this was about more than just exposing one organization. This was about accountability in political organizations that claimed to be educational while operating as partisan machines. This was about showing young people who had been recruited by Turning Point that their leadership might not be what it seemed. And perhaps most importantly, this was about proving that oversight still mattered, that Congress could still do its job, even in an era of partisan gridlock. The committee room was packed that Thursday morning. Every major news outlet had sent reporters. Conservative media was there to defend Kirk. Progressive media was there to watch him fall. But what none of them expected was just how prepared Crockett had come, and just how unprepared Kirk would be for someone who had done their homework. The other committee members watched with varying degrees of interest. Republicans on the committee, many of whom had received support from Turning Point during their campaigns, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They knew they would have to defend Kirk, but they also knew that if Crockett had what she claimed to have, that defense would become increasingly difficult. Democrats on the committee, meanwhile, sensed blood in the water. They had seen Crockett's preparation in the pre-hearing meetings. They knew she didn't make accusations she couldn't back up, and they were ready to pile on if Kirk stumbled. But this wasn't really about partisan politics, despite what the cable news channels would say later. This was about something more fundamental. The question of whether organizations that claimed to be educating young people about politics were actually just enriching their leaders while pushing propaganda. It was a question that went to the heart of how American democracy functioned in the age of dark money and super PACs. The first sign that Charlie Kirk was in trouble came just 5 minutes into his prepared opening statement. He was in the middle of describing Turning Point's mission to educate students about the importance of fiscal responsibility, free markets, and limited government when Crockett interrupted. "Mr. Kirk, I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, though her tone suggested she wasn't sorry at all. "But when you talk about fiscal responsibility, does that include the $2-3 million your organization spent on what you called student leadership conferences that seemed to primarily benefit you and your senior staff?" Kirk paused mid-sentence, his prepared remarks suddenly feeling like a shield made of paper against an incoming missile. "Congresswoman, all of our conferences are focused on student education and leadership development." "Really?" Crockett pulled out another document, "because I have here an invoice from the Ritz-Carlton in Phoenix showing that your student leadership conference in January 2023 included a $45,000 bar tab, $30,000 for a private DJ, and something listed as executive team building that costs $75,000. Can you explain how getting drunk at a luxury hotel teaches fiscal responsibility to college students?" The committee room stirred with murmurs. Kirk's face reamed. "That's a mischaracterization of, is it?" Crockett didn't let him finish. "Because I also have testimony from 6 former Turning Point employees who say that these student conferences typically had about 50 actual students and 200 donors and staff members. Would you like me to read their statements into the record?" This was the pattern that would define the next hour. Kirk would try to deliver a talking point and Crockett would counter with a specific document, invoice, or witness statement. It was like watching a prosecutor methodically destroy a defendant who had thought they were too smart to get caught. "Let's talk about your salary, Mr. Kirk," Crockett continued, flipping to a news section of her papers. "According to your organization's 990 forms, you paid yourself $350,000 last year. But that's not the whole story, is it?" Kirk shifted in his seat. "My compensation is set by our board of directors and is completely appropriate for an organization of our size." "Your board of directors," Crockett smiled slightly, "which consists of your childhood friend, your former business partner, and 3 major donors who had received significant benefits from their association with Turning Point. But let's get back to your actual compensation. The $350,000 salary is just what's reported on the 990. What about the $500,000 cents in speaking fees you received from Turning Point affiliated organizations? What about the private jet usage valued at $1.02 million? What about the luxury apartment in Phoenix that Turning Point pays for, claiming it's an office space?" Each revelation landed like a punch. Kirk tried to respond, but Crockett had clearly done her homework in a way he hadn't anticipated. She knew about the shell organizations, the affiliated groups that allowed money to be moved around without appearing on the main organization's books. She knew about the contracts with vendors who happened to be owned by Kirk's friends and family members. Miss Kirk Crockett's voice grew sharper. "You present yourself as a champion of conservative values, someone fighting for the average American against elite corruption. But aren't you the corruption? Aren't you the elite taking advantage of well-meaning donors who think their money is going to educate young people?" Kirk's composure finally cracked. "How dare you?" he shouted, his face now bright red. "I have dedicated my life to the conservative movement. I've built an organization that reaches millions of young people. You're just trying to destroy me because you disagree with my politics." But Crockett remained calm, which only made Kirk look more unhinged. Mr. Kirk, I don't care about your politics. I care about potential fraud. I care about donors, many of them elderly people on fixed incomes who sent you $20 and $50 donations, thinking they were supporting student education, not funding your lavish lifestyle. She pulled out a printed email. I have here a message from Dorothy Williams, an 82-year-old widow from Arkansas who sent you her entire $5,000 stimulus check because she believed in your mission. Would you like me to read what she wrote when she found out about your spending? Kirk tried to regain control. We have thousands of satisfied donors who support our work. Let's talk about that work. Crockett interrupted again. You claim to have chapters on 3,000 campuses, but when my staff contacted 100 random schools from your list, 73 of them said they had no active Turning Point chapter. Another 15 said the chapter consisted of fewer than 5 members. Can you explain how you're counting these chapters? The committee Republicans tried to throw Kirk a lifeline. Representative Jim Jordan interrupted. Point of order, Mr. Chairman. The witness should be allowed to complete his answers without constant interruption. But even Jordan's intervention couldn't save Kirk from what came next. Crockett had saved her most damaging revelations for when she knew the cameras would be most focused, when social media would be most engaged, when the moment would have maximum impact. Thank you, Representative Jordan Crockett said smoothly. Mr. Kirk, please take all the time you need to explain this. She held up a document that made Kirk's face go pale. This is a recording transcript from your organization's leadership meeting in December 2023. In it, you explicitly tell your team to, and I quote, inflate our campus numbers for the donors and make sure the real financial documents never see daylight. Would you like to explain that? The hearing room exploded. Reporters started typing furiously on their phones. Camera flashes went off despite the rules against them. And Charlie Kirk, for perhaps the first time in his public life, had absolutely nothing to say. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. His lawyer leaned over and whispered urgently in his ear. But the damage was done. Crockett had him, and everyone in the room knew it. I would need to review the context of that conversation. Kirk finally stammered. The context, Crockett said, her voice now cold as ice, is that you've been running a grift. The context is that you've been defrauding donors. The context is that you've built a personal fortune on the backs of people who trusted you. And the context, Mr. Irk, is that you got caught. The committee's Republican chairman tried to restore order, calling for a recess, but the moment had already gone viral. Clips of Kirk's stammering non-response were being shared thousands of times per minute. The hashtag Charlie Kirk melt was trending nationally, and the hearing had still barely gotten started. During the 15-minute recess, Kirk huddled with his legal team in a corner of the hallway. Reporters shouted questions at him, but he didn't respond. His usual swagger was completely gone, replaced by the look of a man who had just realized that his entire world was about to come crashing down. Meanwhile, Crockett stood calmly at the other end of the hallway, surrounded by her staff. She wasn't gloating or praying for the cameras. She was reviewing her notes for the next round of questions because she wasn't close to being done. When the hearing resumed, Kirk tried a different strategy. He attempted to go on the offensive, claiming that Crockett's investigation...
He said it himself in another video that he had to get... They was going to put him in jail. He said it himself.
...was a witch hunt motivated by partisan politics. He invoked cancel culture, the deep state, and every other buzzword he could think of. But it all rang hollow when contrasted with the specific documented allegations Crockett had presented. Kirk, Crockett said after letting him rant for a few minutes. You can call this whatever you want, but these are your financial documents. These are your emails. These are your recorded words. This isn't about politics. It's about potential criminal fraud, and deflecting to talking points won't change the facts. She then moved to perhaps the most damaging part of her presentation, the human cost of Kirk's alleged fraud. She had statements from former Turning Point employees who described a toxic culture of fear and intimidation. She had messages from young conservatives who felt betrayed when they learned how their volunteer labor had been exploited. And she had heartbreaking letters from donors who had given money they couldn't afford to lose. Let me read you something, Mr. Kirk, Crockett said, pulling out a letter. This is from James Patterson, a 19-year-old college student who worked as an unpaid intern for Turning Point for 6 months. He writes, I believed in the mission. I thought I was part of something important. I worked 60-hour weeks for no pay because Charlie told us we were changing the world. Then I found out he was using organization funds to lease luxury cars while telling us there was no money for intern stipends. I felt used and betrayed. Kirk tried to interject. We have thousands of satisfied interns and volunteers. How many of them know the truth about where the money goes? Crockett shot back. How many of them know that while they're working for free, you're flying private to vacation homes? The tension in the room was palpable. Even some of the Republican committee members were looking uncomfortable. They had come prepared to defend Kirk against what they assumed would be partisan attacks. But Crockett's evidence was too specific, too documented, too damaging to simply dismiss. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who had been quietly watching the entire exchange, finally spoke up. Mr. Irk, I'd like to follow up on something Congresswoman Crockett mentioned. You claim to be educating students about free markets and capitalism. Can you explain how taking tax-exempt donations and using them for personal enrichment represents the free market principles you claim to champion? Kirk tried to pivot. Congresswoman Turning Point USA has educated millions of students about that's not what I asked. Ocasio-Cortez interrupted. I asked how your personal enrichment through a tax-exempt organization represents free market capitalism. Isn't what you're doing actually closer to the socialism you claim to oppose? Taking other people's money and redistributing it to yourself? The question hung in the air. Kirk's face went through several shades of red. He started to speak several times, but stopped himself. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear again. Finally, Kirk attempted a response. Congresswoman, that's a complete mischaracterization of our organization's work and mission. But Crockett was ready with more evidence. Speaking of mischaracterization, Mr. Kirk, let's talk about your organization's professor watch list. You claim it's about promoting intellectual diversity on campus, but I have here internal emails where you explicitly state that the list is meant to, quote, intimidate and silence liberal professors. How is intimidation and silencing consistent with the free speech values you claim to support? The hits kept coming. Crockett had evidence of Turning Point using donation money to pay for opposition research on Democratic candidates despite their tax-exempt status prohibiting such political activity. She had documentation of the organization coordinating with political campaigns in violation of IRS rules. She had proof that student chapters were being directed to engage in partisan political activities while claiming to be educational. Mr. Kirk, Crockett said, her voice now showing the first signs of genuine anger. You've built an empire on lies. You've taken advantage of young people's idealism and older people's generosity. You've perverted the concept of political education into a personal enrichment scheme. And you've done it all while wrapping yourself in the flag and claiming to be a patriot. The moment that would define the entire hearing came exactly 1 hour and 37 minutes into Kirk's testimony. Crockett had been methodically building her case document by document, revelation by revelation. Kirk had been getting increasingly agitated, his responses becoming more erratic and offensive. But what happened next, nobody saw coming, not even Crockett's own staff. Mr. Kirk, Crockett said, pulling out a thick folder marked with red tabs. I want to talk about something called the Phoenix Project. Do you know what I'm referring to? For the first time since the hearing began, Kirk went completely white. Not red with anger, not flushed with embarrassment, but white with what looked like genuine fear. He turned to his lawyer, who was frantically flipping through papers. I am not sure what you're referring to, Kirk said, but his voice cracked in a way that made it clear he knew exactly what she was talking about. Really? Crockett opened the folder. Because I have here a complete paper trail of the Phoenix Project, a scheme where Turning Point USA created fake grassroots organizations to funnel money from foreign donors into American political campaigns. This is beyond fraud, Mr. Kirk. This is potentially treason. The hearing room erupted in chaos. Committee members were shouting over each other. Reporters were standing up trying to get better angles for their cameras. The chairman was banging his gavel, demanding order. But through it all, Crockett remained calm, holding the documents that could potentially send Charlie Kirk to federal prison. According to these documents, Crockett continued, raising her voice to be heard over the chaos. Turning Point USA received $15 million 0 cents from foreign nationals through a complex web of shell organizations, all coordinated through what you called the Phoenix Project. This money was then donated to political candidates who supported Turning Point's agenda in direct violation of federal law prohibiting foreign interference in American elections. Kirk's lawyer grabbed the microphone. A client invokes his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. But Crockett wasn't done. Oh, he can invoke whatever he wants. But these documents speak for themselves. I have bank records, encrypted communications that were decoded by whistleblowers, and testimony from 3 former Turning Point executives who were directly involved in the Phoenix Project. She pulled out a specific document. This is an email from Mr. Kirk, dated June 15th, 2023. In it, he writes to his CFO, quote, "Make sure the Phoenix money is completely untraceable. We can't have anyone connecting it back to the foreign sources." Mr. Kirk, would you like to explain what you meant by foreign sources? Kirk sat silent, his lawyer's hand on his arm keeping him from responding. "Let me help you," Crockett continued. The foreign sources included a Russian oligarch, a Chinese real estate developer with ties to the Communist Party, and a Saudi prince who wanted to influence American energy policy. You took money from foreign adversaries, Mr. Kirk. You sold out your country for personal profit. Representative Matt Gaetz tried to interrupt, shouting about procedural violations and demanding that Crockett be censured for her accusations. But even his theatrical protests couldn't distract from the devastating evidence being presented. Crockett pulled out another document. This is a recorded conversation between Mr. Kirk and an undercover FBI informant from August 2023. "Oh yes, Mr. Kirk. The FBI has been investigating you for over a year. In this recording, you explicitly discuss how to hide foreign money and make it appear as domestic donations. You say, and I quote, 'The Arabs pay well, and as long as we keep it quiet, everyone wins.' The FBI revelation sent another shock wave through the room. Kirk's lawyer was now actively restraining him from speaking, whispering urgently that anything he said could be used against him in criminal proceedings. But here's the most interesting part, Crockett said, now addressing the room more than Kirk himself. The Phoenix Project wasn't just about taking foreign money. It was about influencing American elections at the most fundamental level. Turning Point USA used this foreign money to fund voter suppression efforts in minority communities, to spread disinformation about mail-in voting, and to coordinate with foreign troll farms to manipulate social media. She held up a chart showing the flow of money from foreign sources through various shell companies to Turning Point, and then out to political campaigns and disinformation operations. It was complex but clear, the kind of visual that would be replayed on every news channel for weeks. "Mr. Kirk styles himself a patriot," Crockett said, her voice now dripping with disgust. "He wraps himself in the American flag and talks about defending our values. But what we see here is a man who sold those values to the highest bidder. A man who took money from America's enemies to subvert our democracy. A man who betrayed everything he claimed to stand for." Kirk finally couldn't contain himself anymore. Despite his lawyer's attempts to stop him, he grabbed the microphone and shouted, "This is all lies. This is a setup. You're trying to destroy me because I'm effective. Because young conservatives listen to me." "They listen to you," Crockett shot back. "Because they don't know you're a fraud. They don't know you're taking money from foreign governments. They don't know that while you're telling them to be patriots, you're actively working against American interests." She pulled out one final document. "This is a resignation letter from your former CFO, Michael Stevens, dated last month. In it, he details everything about the Phoenix Project and states that he's cooperating fully with federal investigators. He's already pleaded guilty to federal charges in exchange for his testimony against you. Move on. It's over, Mr. Kirk. Your empire built on lies is crumbling." Kirk stood up abruptly, his chair falling backward. "This is a witch hunt. This is the deep state trying to silence conservative voices. I won't stand for this." "Then sit down," Crockett said coldly. "Because whether you're standing or sitting, you're going to face justice for what you've done." The committee chairman, realizing he had completely lost control of the hearing, called for an immediate recess, but the damage was done. In less than 2 hours, Jasmine Crockett had systematically destroyed Charlie Kirk's reputation, exposed potentially criminal activity, and revealed that one of the most prominent conservative youth organizations in America was potentially a front foreign influence operations. As Kirk was escorted out of the hearing room by his security detail, protesters who had gathered outside could be heard chanting. Some were former Turning Point members who felt betrayed. Others were activists who had long suspected Kirk was a fraud. But they all had one thing in common. They had just watched a man who had seemed untouchable get completely demolished by a freshman congresswoman who had done her homework. Social media exploded with reactions. Charlie Kirk meltdown was the top trending topic worldwide. Clips of his stammering responses and angry outbursts were being turned into memes within minutes. Conservative commentators who had previously defended Kirk were either silent or actively distancing themselves from him. And progressive commentators were having a field day with the revelation that a man who had accused others of being un-American had literally taken money from foreign governments. But perhaps the most damaging reactions came from the young conservatives who had looked up to Kirk. Messages flooded social media from college students who were actively distancing themselves from him. And progressive commentators were having a field day with the revelation that a man who had accused others of being un-American had literally taken money from foreign governments. But perhaps the most damaging reactions came from the young conservatives who had looked up to Kirk. Messages flooded social media from college students who felt betrayed, who had volunteered countless hours for Turning Point, who had defended Kirk against their liberal classmates, only to find out he had been lying to them all along. One viral tweet from a former Turning Point chapter president read, "I gave 3 years of my life to this organization. I lost friends defending Charlie Kirk. I thought I was fighting for conservative principles. Turns out I was just making him rich. I feel sick." The mainstream media coverage was relentless. CNN ran a breaking news banner for 3 straight hours. Fox News, which had given Kirk a platform countless times, suddenly found other stories to cover. MSNBC had panels of legal experts discussing the potential criminal charges Kirk could face. And every major newspaper was preparing lengthy investigative pieces on how Turning Point USA had operated for so long without scrutiny. The immediate aftermath of the hearing was chaos. Within hours, the Turning Point USA Board of Directors called an emergency meeting. By evening, 3 board members had resigned. By the next morning, Charlie Kirk had been placed on administrative leave from his own organization. Though everyone knew this was just a face-saving measure before his inevitable termination, the FBI, which Crockett had revealed was already investigating Kirk, moved quickly. Federal agents raided Turning Point USA's headquarters in Phoenix, carrying out boxes of documents and computer equipment. They also raided Kirk's personal residence, where neighbors reported seeing agents loading evidence into vans for hours. Kirk tried to fight back through social media, posting a series of increasingly unhinged videos claiming he was being persecuted for his political beliefs, but his usual army of online supporters was notably absent. Even the most die-hard MAGA influencers were distancing themselves from him, recognizing that association with Kirk was now toxic. Within a week, the dominoes really started falling. The IRS announced it was reviewing Turning Point USA's tax-exempt status. Multiple state attorneys general announced investigations into potential fraud. And perhaps most significantly, a group of former donors filed a class action lawsuit seeking the return of millions of dollars in donations they claimed were obtained through fraud. The political implications were enormous. The Republicans who had previously embraced Turning Point USA were scrambling to return donations and delete photos with Kirk from their social media. Several candidates who had received support from Turning Point were now facing questions about whether they knew about the foreign money. The scandal was threatening to expand far beyond just Kirk and his organization. Democrats, meanwhile, were using the scandal to highlight what they called a pattern of corruption in conservative organizations. Jasmine Crockett became an overnight sensation with profiles in major magazines and invitations to every political talk show. She handled her newfound fame with the same calm professionalism she had shown during the hearing, always bringing the focus back to the importance of oversight and accountability. But the real story was the impact on the young conservatives who had been Turning Point's base. Many felt genuinely betrayed and began questioning not just Kirk, but the entire movement he had claimed to represent. Some started their own organizations determined to create actually grassroots conservative youth movements without the corruption and grift. Others left political activism altogether too disillusioned to continue. 3 weeks after the hearing, the Department of Justice unsealed a 147-count indictment against Charlie Kirk and 6 other Turning Point executives. The charges included wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and violation of foreign agent registration laws. If convicted on all counts, Kirk faced the possibility of spending the rest of his life in federal prison. The indictment revealed even more damaging details than Crockett had presented in the hearing. There were secret recordings of Kirk explicitly discussing how to hide foreign money. There were documents showing that Turning Point had created entirely fictional student chapters to inflate their numbers for donors. There were communications showing Kirk knew exactly what he was doing and didn't care as long as he got rich. Kirk's fall from grace was complete and spectacular. The man who had once commanded speaking fees of $50,000 and flew on private jets was now facing bankruptcy from legal fees. His social media followers abandoned him in droves. His publisher canceled his upcoming book. His speaking engagements were all canceled. In less than a month, he had gone from conservative kingmaker to pariah. But the investigation didn't stop with Kirk. Federal prosecutors, working with information from cooperating witnesses, began unraveling a larger network of conservative organizations that had been operating similar schemes. It turned out Kirk wasn't unique. He was just the one who got caught. The scandal was expanding to encompass what some journalists were calling the conservative grift industrial complex. Major donors to conservative causes began demanding unprecedented transparency from the organizations they supported. Some pulled their funding entirely, deciding that the risk of association with potentially corrupt organizations wasn't worth it. This created a funding crisis for legitimate conservative groups that had nothing to do with Kirk, but were now viewed with suspicion by association. The Phoenix Project revelations also triggered a national security review. If Turning Point USA had been taking foreign money to influence American politics, how many other organizations were doing the same thing? The FBI and CIA launched a joint task force to investigate foreign influence operations, and what they found was disturbing. The problem was much bigger than just Charlie Kirk. 6 months after the hearing, Charlie Kirk pleaded guilty to 15 federal charges in exchange for a reduced sentence and cooperation with ongoing investigations. His plea agreement required him to forfeit all assets obtained through fraud, effectively leaving him bankrupt. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, though he could get out in 8 with good behavior. During his sentencing hearing, Kirk attempted to apologize, claiming he had lost his way and betrayed the trust of those who believed in him. But the judge wasn't buying it, noting that Kirk had shown no remorse until he was caught, and that his crimes had corrupted the political process and betrayed the trust of thousands of well-meaning Americans. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, had become one of the most respected members of Congress. Her methodical takedown of Kirk had shown that oversight could still work, that corruption could still be exposed, that David could still beat Goliath if David did the homework. She used her elevated platform to push for stricter regulations on political organizations and greater transparency in political funding. She also showed remarkable grace toward the young people who had been fooled by Kirk. Rather than gloating or condemning them, she reached out to former Turning Point members, encouraging them to stay engaged in politics, but to be more skeptical of those who claimed to speak for them. Many of these young conservatives, while not agreeing with Crockett's politics, respected her for treating them with dignity rather than contempt. The long-term impact of the Kirk scandal was still being felt years later. It had exposed fundamental weaknesses in how political organizations were regulated and monitored. It had shown how easy it was for charlatans to exploit political passion for personal gain. And it had demonstrated that in an era of intense polarization, even the most prominent figures could fall if their corruption was exposed. Universities began implementing stricter guidelines for student political organizations, requiring greater transparency in funding and operations. The IRS increased its scrutiny of tax-exempt political organizations. And perhaps most importantly, donors across the political spectrum became more demanding about how their money was being used. The conservative movement itself underwent something of a reckoning. Many argued that Kirk's corruption had been enabled by a culture that valued owning the libs over actual conservative principles. There were calls for a return to traditional conservative values rather than the performative politics that Kirk had embodied. Some young conservatives started new organizations focused on policy rather than personality, substance rather than social media stunts. But there were also those who refused to accept Kirk's guilt, who continued to believe he was the victim of a deep state conspiracy. These true believers created a Free Charlie Kirk movement, though it never gained much traction beyond the fringes of the internet. Kirk himself from federal prison occasionally released statements claiming he would be vindicated by history. Though fewer and fewer people were listening, the Turning Point USA organization itself didn't survive the scandal. Despite attempts to rebrand and restructure, the damage was too severe. Major donors withdrew their support, Chapters disbanded, and within a year of Kirk's arrest, the organization formally dissolved. Its assets were liquidated to pay legal fees and settlements, and what had once been an $80 million zero-cents organization ceased to exist. Other conservative youth organizations stepped in to fill the void, but they did so with much greater transparency and accountability. The Kirk scandal had taught them that the era of operating without scrutiny was over. They had to be above board, not just to avoid legal trouble, but to maintain credibility with their base. For Jasmine Crockett, the Kirk hearing became a defining moment of her political career, but she was careful not to let it define her entirely. She continued her oversight work, investigating other organizations across the political spectrum that might be engaged in similar corruption. She showed that her commitment was to accountability, not partisan point scoring. She also
Under the cold wash of fluorescent lights, the chamber trembled with murmurs and clipped breaths as papers hissed across polished desks and microphones hummed, waiting for blood. A smug smile flickered, a taunt landed, and the marble walls seemed to hold their breath. Then, Jasmine Crockett leaned in, calm, surgical, and asked one question that froze the room, turning gasps into stunned silence. In the next 5 minutes, America would never see this senator the same way again. Before we reveal what happens next, hit like and subscribe, because the knockout you're about to witness will be replayed for years. Jasmine Crockett stood in a sharp navy blazer with clean lapels, sleeves eased just above the wrist, a boxer's ready posture disguised in stateswoman.
What happened in the Supreme Court chambers yesterday left Justice Clarence Thomas speechless, and may have just changed the course of American legal history forever. Picture this. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, the fiery Texas Democrat known for her sharp tongue and brilliant legal mind, stood before the highest court in the land. She was there to argue a crucial voting rights case that could affect millions of Americans. But what she didn't expect was Justice Thomas to openly mock her legal credentials right there in front of the entire court. "Miss Crockett," Thomas said with a dismissive smirk, "perhaps you should stick to Twitter arguments rather than constitutional law. This is the Supreme Court, not a political rally." The room fell silent. Legal experts gasped. Court reporters stopped typing. Even the other justices looked uncomfortable. But what Jasmine Crockett said next didn't just silence Justice Thomas. It exposed decades of his questionable decisions and turned him into a trending topic for all the wrong reasons. This wasn't just a legal argument. This was a complete dismantling of one of the most powerful men in America by a woman who refused to be silenced. The video of this confrontation is already breaking the internet. Legal experts are calling it the most devastating takedown in Supreme Court history. Social media is exploding with clips of Crockett's response, and even conservative commentators are struggling to defend Thomas's behavior. But here's what makes this story even more incredible. Crockett didn't just destroy Thomas in the moment. She did it with such precision, such legal brilliance, that she's already being talked about as the future of American law. This is what happens when preparation meets opportunity, when brilliance meets courage. Before we dive into how a freshman congresswoman took down a Supreme Court justice, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you won't miss any of these incredible political showdowns. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. To understand the earthquake that was about to hit the Supreme Court, you need to know these two powerhouses and why this moment mattered so much. At 43, Jasmine Crockett represents everything that threatens the old guard. Born and raised in ST2. Evan Louis, she worked her way through college, earned her law degree from the University of Houston, and built a successful legal practice before entering politics. She's not just another politician. She's a licensed attorney who's won cases, defended clients, and knows the law inside and out. Crockett made national headlines when she first entered Congress in 2023. Remember when she completely destroyed Marjorie Taylor Greene during that House committee hearing? "Do you know what we're here for?" she asked Greene, her voice dripping with a kind of controlled fury that comes from years of courtroom experience. That clip went viral with over 10 million views. But here's what makes Crockett dangerous to people like Thomas. She's young, she's black, she's a woman, and she's absolutely brilliant. She graduated magna cum laude, passed the bar on her first try, and has never lost a case when it comes to defending civil rights. The legal establishment can't dismiss her as just another politician because she's one of theme, except she's fighting for the people they've left behind. More importantly, Crockett understands power dynamics in a way that older politicians don't. She knows that in today's media landscape, viral moments can change everything. Her takedown of Marjorie Taylor Greene wasn't just good politics. It was strategic brilliance. The House Judiciary Committee hearing room fell completely silent. Jim Jordan, the veteran congressman from Ohio who had dominated these chambers for over a decade, sat frozen in his chair. His face, usually red with righteous anger during his famous rapid-fire questionings, had gone pale. Across from him, Representative Jasmine Crockett.
And you raised this in your testimony, Mr. Fahey. The opportunity cost, when Alvin Bragg did the day one memo, says we are not going to charge all these felonies, we're going to bring them down to misdemeanors and let the bad guys roam the streets of New York. How that squares with what happened here, that to me is the real issue. That's the issue that most Americans see, like, we're going to do this to the former president of the United States, meanwhile, take felony charges against really bad guys on the street and bring them down to misdemeanors. That's the opportunity cost here, I believe, in Manhattan. You get the last word, Mr. Fahey.
Yeah, exactly. When you're letting carjackers out on bail or illegal immigrants that assault police officers aren't getting prosecuted, but this is the way you're using your time, in addition to the fact you run on a soft on crime policy and then you take the most creative, aggressive approach to this crime, it's hard to argue it's anything other than a political motivation.
Okay, I got a lot of ground to cover. I do want to clarify, Mr. Fahey, when you consistently talk about or New York crime, you're speaking in an opinionated stance. You're not speaking from a place of fact, correct?
No, I'm speaking from a place of facts.
Okay, well, let me clarify for you. Thank you so much. I'm reclaiming my time. Let me clarify for you that NYPD puts out reports. And in April, it said overall index crime across New York City dropped another 4.9%. As it relates to May, the report says overall index crime across New York dropped another 2.4%, and June's report hasn't come out. I would ask for unanimous consent to enter this into the record. Now, moving on, I just want to level set because I feel as if some people don't understand how government works, and I don't know how they got to Congress. So, Mr. Wu, I'm going to need you to help me out because I don't know that I trust that other people will know the answers to these questions. Number one, how many branches of government do we have?
3.
3. Okay, sounds good. So, can you name them for me?
Legislative, judiciary, and executive.
Very good. Okay, so currently, I think that I serve in the legislative branch. Would you agree?
I agree.
Okay, fine. Can you tell me when somebody goes to court, such as a criminal convicted of 34 felony counts, state court in New York, would that be the legislative people or judicial people?
Well, it's really the executive that's prosecuting, and then it's within the judiciary to run the trial properly.
Okay, very good. So, judiciary. So, typically, if someone has an issue with, say, what happens in court, do they then somehow hop from state court all the way to the federal legislative branch, or is there a different process in which you are supposed to be able to explain any issues you may have?
The process would be the judicial appellate process, holding aside the issue of state versus federal.
Oh, interesting. Okay. All right. So normally people don't get convicted on a state level and somehow end up litigating the issue on the federal level in the legislative branch. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So something is different about what's going on today. I just wanted to clarify because I thought I was living in the upside down for a second. Now, I want to move on and talk about how someone is prosecuted. Currently, because under Project 2025, we'll get there will be a different way to prosecute people. But currently, it is my understanding, and I only kind of went to law school, passed a couple of bar exams, and practiced on the state and federal levels, but just clarify for me, when someone goes in to be prosecuted, is it, say, the President of the United States that somehow becomes the state prosecutor in New York?
No, absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Because he's the executor, huh? That's that other branch.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So you have this prosecutor, and in this case, it's Alvin Bragg, who was duly elected, correct?
Correct.
Not appointed by the president, correct?
Right.
Duly elected by the citizens in his jurisdiction, right?
Right.
So he's elected, and usually there's some sort of an investigation that takes place, correct?
Prior to his election?
No. With a case, I'm sorry.
Yes,
I've
right.
moved on.
Yes.
All right. So the very first part of a case is that we go through an investigation. After that investigation, then the prosecutor usually has what we would consider to be some sort of prosecutorial discretion as to whether or not they want to go forward, correct?
Correct.
All right. And then they use that discretion, but then when it's somebody that is facing a felony amount of time, which is usually in most states over a year, then they have to present it to a grand jury. Is that right?
That's right.
Now, a grand jury is comprised of citizens, correct?
Correct.
U.S. citizens from that area, correct?
Right.
Okay, so they have to come to the conclusion that they are going to issue what we call a true bill, correct?
Correct.
All right, so then we have an indictment. And then there's pretrial motions, there's pretrial hearings, all kinds of stuff, right?
Right.
All right, and then ultimately, depending on where you are, you have the opportunity to say, hey, I want a jury trial, correct?
Correct.
And a jury trial is comprised of U.S. citizens again, right?
Right.
Okay, very good. All right, so can you tell me so far if all of this took place in the case in New York?
Yes, it did.
Oh, okay. All right, so you get to trial. Now, when you show up to trial and you're facing a felony amount of time, as a defendant, are you not entitled to an attorney?
Yes, you are.
And your attorney is allowed to pick the jury, they're allowed to present evidence, and ultimately it is a jury of your peers who decides whether or not you are guilty or not, correct?
Correct.
And in this case, 30
as the judge of all two.
and in this case, they found him guilty not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4, not 5, not 6. I could keep going on, but 34 counts were given. So the opinions of these people who were not juries is not what we do in this country. In this country, we have a system in which jurors decide who is found guilty, and if you have a problem with that, you go to the appellate court, which the last time I checked, he was raising money so that he could go to the appellate court and appeal his decision, and they will have the final say so. Thank you so much.
I just wanted to briefly address the point brought up by the representative from Texas, Ms. Crockett, who accused me and my colleagues over here of ignoring the Constitution.
I can't tell you how many lies are made up by MAGA followers about me. I done been all kinds of things. And none of it is true just because they put it out there on social media. That is the problem that we're having right now in this country, is that it seems like nobody cares about the truth anymore. And what we're trying to do is say we have a fact finding, and let me be clear. I am not saying that the criminal justice system or any other justice system has ever always been perfect. I am not trying to say that. But we do have a system, and that system is supposed to be based upon the Constitution. And right now, like literally.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas leaned forward with a smirk. Congresswoman, with all due respect, a law degree from Thurgood Marshall doesn't exactly prepare you for constitutional debate, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. The hearing room fell silent. Cameras zeroed in on Representative Jasmine Crockett's face, waiting for a flinch, a stumble, any sign she'd fold. But what happened over the next 30 seconds didn't just leave Justice Thomas speechless. It sent shockwaves to the legal world and became the most watched congressional exchange of the year. That moment stunned legal scholars, reframed how America looks at credentials, and proved why you should never underestimate someone who fought their way to the top. You're watching Justice Land USA and Updates. Before we break down what Crockett did next, the moment that made even Thomas's supporters gasp, tap like and subscribe to Justice Land USA and Updates. This is what happens when arrogance meets preparation.
The CBS studio lights blazed down on the most unexpected showdown in television history. Oprah Winfrey, the billionaire media mogul who had interviewed presidents and shaped American culture for decades, sat frozen in her chair. Her perfectly manicured hands gripped the armrests as Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, eyes blazing with determination. Miss Winfrey, with all due respect, you've been telling America what to think for 30 years. Crockett's voice cut through the studio like a blade. But today, I'm here to tell you that your time of unchecked influence is over. The audience gasped. Camera operators exchanged shocked glances. This was supposed to be a friendly discussion about voter engagement. Nobody expected the 42-year-old freshman congresswoman to challenge the queen of daytime television. But Crockett had come prepared with receipts that would shake Oprah's empire to its core. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation that has the entire nation talking, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You don't want to miss a second of this political earthquake that's about to unfold. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. This story is going viral across all 50 states and beyond. What happened next would trend on every social media platform for weeks. The woman who had made careers and destroyed them with a single interview was about to face her match in a congresswoman nobody saw coming. This wasn't just a clash of personalities. This was a battle for the soul of American media and politics. To understand how we got to this moment, we need to understand who these two titans are and why this confrontation matters more than any political debate this year. Oprah Winfrey needs no introduction. For over 3 decades, she has been America's therapist, life coach, and moral compass rolled into one. Her net worth exceeds $3 billion. Her endorsement can make a book an instant bestseller or turn an unknown into a household name. When Oprah speaks, millions listen. She's interviewed every president since Reagan, launched careers, and built a media empire that spans television, magazines, and digital platforms. Her famous Oprah's Favorite Things episodes could make or break companies overnight. But beneath the warm smile and generous giveaways, Oprah has always been a political force. Her 2008 endorsement of Barack Obama was credited with delivering him over 1 million votes. When she speaks on social issues, stock markets shift. When she recommends a product, it sells out nationwide. She's been called the most influential woman in America. And nobody has successfully challenged that title until today. Enter Jasmine Crockett, the daughter of a school teacher and a postal worker from St. Louis. At 42, she's young by congressional standards, but she didn't come to Washington to play nice. A civil rights attorney who cut her teeth defending protesters in Ferguson, Crockett won her Texas congressional seat by speaking truth to power. She doesn't have Oprah's billions or media empire, but she has something else. An unwavering commitment to calling out hypocrisy wherever she sees it. Crockett grew up watching Oprah like millions of other Americans. She admired her, learned from her, even wrote a college essay about her. But finding Oprah, even like so many other Americans, wasn't so easy for her. As Crockett rose through Texas politics, she began noticing patterns. The way Oprah's political endorsements always seemed to benefit her business interests. The way her charitable foundations operated. The questions nobody dared to ask because, well, she was Oprah. The stakes of this confrontation went far beyond personal rivalry. This was about media accountability in an age of influence. It was about whether anyone, no matter how beloved, should have unchecked power to shape public opinion. It was about the difference between authentic advocacy and performative activism. The CBS studio had been carefully prepared for what producers thought would be a softball conversation. Oprah was promoting her latest book club selection while Crockett was supposed to discuss voter registration efforts in Texas. The set was warm and inviting with comfortable chairs and soft lighting designed to make guests feel at ease. Coffee mugs with the CBS logo sat on the table between them, steam still rising from the fresh brew. But something was different about Crockett's demeanor from the moment she walked onto the set. She didn't seem nervous or starstruck like most of Oprah's guests. She sat straight back, a folder of documents beside her chair that she hadn't mentioned to producers. Her eyes never left Oprah's face, even during the commercial breaks. Oprah, for her part, seemed to sense something was off. The woman who had interviewed thousands of people had developed an instinct for tension. She adjusted her posture, her famous warm smile slightly tighter than usual. She had faced tough interviews before, but always as the one asking questions, not answering them. The show's host, Gayle King, Oprah's best friend, and CBS This Morning anchor, tried to keep things light with opening pleasantries, but even she could feel the electricity in the air. The audience, a mix of Oprah superfans and political junkies who had come to see Crockett, sat on the edge of their seats. What nobody knew was that Crockett had spent months preparing for this moment. She had hired researchers, filed Freedom of Information requests, and interviewed dozens of former Oprah employees who had signed NDAs, but were willing to talk off the record. She had a story to tell, and she had chosen this moment on live television with millions watching to tell it. The conversation started innocuously enough. Gayle King opened with a softball question about voter engagement, allowing both women to discuss the importance of civic participation. Oprah gave her practice speech about democracy and the power of voting, complete with her trademark emotional delivery that had made her a television icon. But when it was Crockett's turn to speak, she didn't follow the script. "You know, miss, Winfrey, you talk beautifully about democracy and voting. Crockett began, her voice steady and clear. But I have to ask, when you endorsed candidates in 2018 and 2020, did you disclose that your production company had financial ties to their campaigns? The studio fell silent. Gayle King's mouth opened slightly in shock. Oprah's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, a tell that only her closest associates would recognize as danger. I'm not sure what you're implying, Congresswoman. Oprah responded, her voice maintaining its warmth, but with an edge underneath. My political endorsements have always come from my personal convictions. Crockett reached for the folder beside her chair. I'm not implying anything, Miss Winfrey. I'm stating facts. She pulled out a document. According to FEC filings, Harpo Productions received $3.2 million in consulting fees from political action committees associated with candidates you endorsed. That's public record. The audience gasped. Gayle King looked like she wanted to cut to commercial, but this was live television. There was no stopping what was happening. Oprah's composure, legendary in the industry, began to crack slightly. Those were legitimate business arrangements that had nothing to do with my personal endorsements. Really? Crockett pressed on. So, it's just a coincidence that every candidate who hired your company for consulting received your endorsement within weeks. The Congresswoman wasn't done. She pulled out another document. Let's talk about your charity work since you've built your brand on generosity and giving back. The Oprah Winfrey Foundation, the Oprah Winfrey Operating Foundation, the Angel Network. Beautiful names, inspiring missions. But did you know, audience, that less than 40% of donations actually reach the intended recipients? That's absolutely false, Oprah interjected, her voice rising slightly. The woman who never lost her cool was starting to show cracks. Is it? Rocket turned to the audience. Because I have the tax filings right here. Would you like me to read them? Administrative costs, salaries for executives who happen to be your personal friends, real estate holdings that have nothing to do with charity work. The tension in the studio was palpable. Security guards moved closer to the stage, unsure if they might be needed. The audience was divided. Some Oprah loyalists looked angry at Crockett's accusations, while others leaned forward, hungry for more revelations. Oprah tried to regain control. Congresswoman Crockett, I've been in this business for longer than you've been alive. I've helped thousands of people, created opportunities for minorities in media, and used my platform for good. What have you done besides make accusations? It was a classic Oprah move. Redirect, personalize, and put the challenger on defense. But Crockett was ready. What have I done? I've served my community without making myself a billionaire in the process. I fought for civil rights without turning it into a brand. And I've never ever told poor people to just think positive while hoarding more wealth than entire communities will see in a lifetime. The audience erupted. Some applauded, others booed. Gayle King finally found her voice. Ladies, please let's maintain some decorum here. But Crockett wasn't finished. You want to talk about your legacy, Amory? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about how you platformed Jenny Ounce, who sold snake oil to desperate people. Let's talk about how you promoted Jenny McCarthy's anti-vaccine propaganda that literally costs lives. Let's talk about how you gave Dr. Phil a show and now he exploits vulnerable people for ratings. Oprah's face flushed. Those people are responsible for their own actions, but you gave them the platform. Crockett shot back. You gave them credibility. Millions of people trusted them because you told them to. The Congresswoman pulled out her phone. I want to read something to your audience. This is from a mother in my district. Her autistic son was bullied relentlessly after Jenny McCarthy went on your show claiming vaccines cause autism. Her son attempted suicide at age 14. She writes, Oprah Winfrey might not have pulled the trigger, but she loaded the gun. The studio was dead silent. Even the camera operators seemed to be holding their breath. Oprah's hands were shaking now. The woman who had reduced presidents to tears, who had built an empire on emotional control, was visibly rattled. You don't understand the pressure of having a platform this large, Oprah said, her voice quieter now. Every decision affects millions of people. I've done my best. Your best. Crockett stood up, the folder still in her hand. Your best includes promoting The Secret and telling poor people they are poor because they don't think positively enough. Your best includes selling weight loss solutions while investing in Weight Watchers. Your best includes crying on camera about racism while living in a bubble of privilege so removed from ordinary Black Americans that you might as well be on another planet. The audience was in chaos now. Some people were standing, others were filming on their phones. The hashtag Crockett vs. Opera was already trending on Twitter. Gayle King attempted to intervene. Congresswoman Crockett, these are very serious accusations. Do you have proof for all of these claims? Crockett turned to her. Every single thing I've said is documented. Unlike Miss Winfrey's show, I don't deal in feelings and inspiration. I deal in facts and accountability. She pulled out another document. Should we discuss the NDAs, the hundreds of former employees who can't speak about their experiences working for you, the settlements paid out to keep people quiet, the culture of fear in your organizations where people are terrified to contradict you? Oprah stood up as well, her full height imposing despite her age. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're a freshman congresswoman looking to make a name for yourself by attacking someone who's actually made a difference. Made a difference? Crockett laughed. But there was no humor in it. You've made a difference to your bank account. $3 billion worth of difference. Meanwhile, the communities you claim to represent are still struggling. The schools you've built for photo apps are falling apart. The families you've helped on your show would drop the moment the cameras stopped rolling. She turned to the audience again. How many of you have bought something because Oprah recommended it? How many of you have felt like failures because you couldn't manifest success like she told you to? How many of you have watched her cry about her struggles while she flies between her multiple mansions in her private jet? The audience was responding now, some nodding, others looking uncomfortable. This wasn't what they had expected when they came to see Oprah Winfrey. You want to know the difference between us, Miss Winfrey? Crockett continued. You built an empire on telling people they are special while making them feel inadequate. I'm building a career on telling people the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Oprah's voice turned icy. You think you're the first person to come after me. I've survived worse than you. I'm not trying to survive you, Crockett responded. I'm trying to expose you. There's a difference. The congresswoman pulled out one final document. This is the interesting one. Want to tell your audience about your relationship with Harvey Weinstein. The color drained from Oprah's face. The audience gasped collectively. Even Gayle King looked shocked. That's enough, Oprah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Is it? Crockett pressed. Because there are photos of you kissing him on the cheek at multiple events. There are records of you attending his parties. There are actresses who say you knew what he was doing and said nothing. I didn't know, Oprah said. But her voice lacked conviction. Really? The woman who knows everything, who has sources everywhere, who built an empire on getting people to reveal their secrets. You didn't know. The studio felt like it might explode from the tension. Security was now actively positioned near both women. Producers were frantically gesturing from off camera, but nobody was paying attention to them. This was the moment Jasmine Crockett had been building toward. She reached into her folder one last time and pulled out a tablet. I want to show you all something, she said, turning to the audience. This is a video from 2013. A young actress, who I won't name to protect her privacy, tried to warn Miss Winfrey about Harvey Weinstein at a charity gala. She held up the tablet, and though the audience couldn't see clearly, the audio was unmistakable. A young woman's voice, trembling, could be heard saying, Miss Winfrey, I need to tell you something about Harvey. Then Oprah's voice, clear and dismissive. Dear, this isn't the time or place. Harvey is a friend and a supporter of many important causes. The studio erupted. Oprah lunged forward as if to grab the tablet, but Crockett stepped back. That's taken out of context, Oprah shouted, her composure completely shattered now. Is it? Crockett asked. Because I have 3 more videos just like it. Different women, different events, same response from you. Gayle King stood up, torn between her loyalty to her best friend and her journalistic integrity. Congresswoman, these are serious allegations. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson sat stone-faced on the Supreme Court bench, her black robe pristine against the mahogany backdrop as Representative Jasmine Crockett approached the podium. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Just moments before, Crockett had confidently told reporters outside, Jackson won't intimidate me with her Harvard credentials. The court needs to hear the truth. Those words now hung in the air as Crockett adjusted the microphone, her bright purple suit standing out among the sea of dark attire. Jackson's eyes narrowed slightly as she studied the freshman congresswoman. Though appointed by Biden, Jackson had surprised many with her fierce independence on the bench. Crockett, riding high from viral congressional moments and media praise, was certain her trademark bold rhetoric would sway the court on this pivotal voting rights case. But Jackson wasn't about to let Crockett's political theater overshadow constitutional principles. The gallery fell silent as Crockett began her opening statement. Within seconds, Justice Jackson's hand rose slightly. The first interruption was coming. What happened next would shock everyone in the courtroom and potentially reshape the relationship between Congress and the court forever. Before diving into this extraordinary legal confrontation, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss our latest political analysis and courtroom breakdowns. Representative Jasmine Crockett had built her reputation as a fiery progressive voice since being elected to Congress. At 42, the former Texas state representative and civil rights attorney had quickly risen to prominence through viral committee hearing moments where she frequently outmaneuvered Republican colleagues. Her eloquent defenses of voting rights and racial justice had made her a social media sensation and a frequent guest on cable news. This Supreme Court appearance wasn't just another day for Crockett. She was representing a coalition of voting rights organizations challenging restrictive voting laws in several states. The laws had been upheld by lower courts, but Crockett believed her compelling personal narrative and passionate advocacy would sway the justices, particularly Jackson, whom she assumed would be a natural ally. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, however, was far from the rubber stamp Crockett expected. At 53, Jackson had spent years as a federal judge before making history as the first black woman on the Supreme Court. Her credentials were impeccable. Harvard undergraduate and law degrees, experience as a federal public defender, service on the U.S. Sentencing Commission, and time as both a district and appellate judge. While liberal in judicial philosophy, Jackson had repeatedly demonstrated a commitment to legal principle over political expediency. Her questioning during oral arguments had earned respect from colleagues across the ideological spectrum for its precision and depth. She believed deeply in the court's role as an independent arbiter of the Constitution, not a political battleground. The stakes couldn't be higher. The case, Crockett versus Election Commission of Georgia, would determine access to the ballot for millions of Americans. Progressive organizations viewed it as their best chance to challenge voting restrictions they considered discriminatory. Conservative groups argued the laws protected election integrity. Media outlets had been covering the case for months, with Crockett becoming the public face of the challenge. Behind the scenes, several senior Democratic lawmakers had cautioned Crockett about her approach. The Supreme Court isn't a congressional hearing. Senate Judiciary Chair Dick Durbin had warned her. Justice Jackson will expect rigorous legal arguments, not sound bites. But Crockett, convinced of her rhetorical gifts, had brushed off the advice. "Trust me," she'd replied. "I know how to make an impact." As Crockett began her argument, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Legal observers noticed Jackson's expression changed from neutral to intensely focused. Crockett, dressed in a stylish purple suit, chosen specifically to stand out on camera, began with a personal anecdote rather than legal precedent. Her first tactical error. "My grandmother waited 6 hours to vote in Texas heat," Crockett began, her voice strong and confident. "These laws would have prevented her from casting a ballot at all. That's not just wrong. It's un-American." Before she could continue, Jackson leaned forward slightly, the first sign of what was about to unfold. "Counsel," Justice Jackson interrupted, her voice firm but measured. "While personal narratives are compelling, this court must focus on the constitutional questions at hand. Could you address the standard of review you believe should apply to these state regulations?" The courtroom stirred. First interruption just 30 seconds into Crockett's argument. Crockett blinked, momentarily thrown off rhythm. "Of course, Justice Jackson." She recovered quickly. "But I think it's important to establish the real-world impact of these laws before diving into legal technicalities. These laws disproportionately affect communities of color." "Counsel," Jackson cut in again, her tone slightly sharper. "The legal technicalities, as you call them, are precisely what determine our analysis. I'm asking specifically about whether you're arguing for strict scrutiny or intermediate scrutiny under the 14th Amendment." Second interruption. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Court veterans exchanged glances. Jackson wasn't just asking questions. She was establishing boundaries. Crockett adjusted her approach, trying to regain control. "We believe strict scrutiny applies, Your Honor, because these laws burden a fundamental right and target racial minorities. As the first black woman on this court, I'm sure you understand." Representative Crockett, Jackson interrupted a third time, her voice now carrying an edge that silenced the room. My personal background is irrelevant to this legal analysis. I would appreciate you not making assumptions about my judicial perspective based on my race or gender. Please focus on legal arguments, not identity politics. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Several justices straightened in their seats, now fully engaged in the unexpected drama. Justice Alto raised an eyebrow. Justice Kagan shifted uncomfortably. Even Justice Thomas, known for rarely speaking during oral arguments, appeared to be watching with increased interest. Crockett, visibly flustered but determined, attempted to pivot to statistical evidence. The data clearly shows that after these laws were enacted, black voter participation dropped by 17%, which demonstrates that statistic isn't in the record before us. Jackson interjected for the fourth time. Counsel, we can't consider evidence that wasn't presented in the lower courts. Can you point to where this specific figure appears in the district court proceedings? Crockett shuffled through her notes, trying to locate the reference. I can get that citation for you, Justice Jackson. But the broader point stands that these laws create barriers to voting, that we need specific citations, not broad assertions, Jackson said, interrupting for the fifth time. This court deals in constitutional interpretation backed by evidence and precedent. Without that foundation, your arguments cannot stand. The dynamic was clear now to everyone watching. Jackson, rather than being an ally, was holding Crockett to the high. Here is the constitutional linchpin. Justice Jackson, Crockett said, leaning slightly forward. The Georgia law contains a provision not present in the Arizona statute at issue in Brnovich Section 11C, which grants county election boards discretionary authority to close polling locations with no requirement for public input or justification. This discretionary power with no guiding standards is precisely the kind of provision this court found constitutionally problematic in Louisiana versus United States in 1965. At this, several justices straightened in their seats. Jackson's eyebrows raised slightly. When you combine this standardless discretion with the documented racial impact, you have not just a disparate effect, but a structural constitutional flaw that fails under Arlington Heights versus Metropolitan Housing Corporation. Crockett continued, now fully in her element as a constitutional lawyer rather than a political figure. The provision violates both the procedural and substantive guarantees of the 14th Amendment. Jackson nodded almost imperceptibly, then asked, Counsel, that's a compelling argument regarding Section 11C. Where exactly in the record would we find the evidence of discriminatory application of this discretionary authority? Instead of becoming defensive, Crockett responded with precise citations. The Joint Appendix, pages 287 through 303, 0.3 times more likely in majority-minority precincts than in majority-white precincts with similar population density. The district court acknowledged this evidence, but erroneously applied a rational basis review instead of the heightened. Here is the constitutional linchpin. Justice Jackson, Crockett said, leaning slightly forward. The Georgia law contains a provision not present in the Arizona statute at issue in Brnovich Section 11C, which grants county election boards discretionary authority to close polling locations with no requirement for public input or justification. This discretionary power with no guiding standards is precisely the kind of provision this court found constitutionally problematic in Louisiana versus United States in 1965. At this, several justices straightened in their seats. Jackson's eyebrows raised slightly. When you combine this standardless discretion with the documented racial impact, you have not just a disparate effect, but a structural constitutional flaw that fails under Arlington Heights versus Metropolitan Housing Corporation. Crockett continued, now fully in her element as a constitutional lawyer rather than a political figure. The provision violates both the procedural and substantive guarantee.
The Supreme Court chamber plunged into stunned silence. What had just unfolded was unprecedented in modern judicial history. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, one of the most powerful voices on America's highest court, had attempted to cut off Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett mid-sentence during oral arguments. But Crockett's scorching response left everyone in that marble-columned chamber absolutely speechless. Tension had been mounting for months, yet no one, not the seasoned justices, not the packed gallery, not even the veteran court reporters, anticipated the scene that was about to play out. In just 30 seconds, a rising Democratic star would challenge the very foundation of how the Supreme Court operates, and Justice Sotomayor's reaction would send shockwaves through Washington, D.C. The air in the chamber crackled with anticipation. Spectators who had arrived hours early to secure seats sensed they were on the cusp of witnessing something extraordinary. Legal scholars in the gallery exchanged nervous glances, while veteran Supreme Court reporters poised themselves for what they suspected would be a career-defining moment to cover. Before we delve into this explosive confrontation that's already taking the internet by storm, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss a single moment of this political earthquake that has everyone talking. This story has everything: power, politics, and two brilliant women going head-to-head in the nation's highest court. This wasn't merely a legal disagreement. It was a defining moment when two powerful women, each representing different generations of Democratic leadership, collided in the most public way imaginable. And what Jasmine Crockett said next had the potential to either solidify her career or end it forever. At 70 years old, Justice Sonia Sotomayor stands as one of the Supreme Court's most influential voices. Appointed by President Obama in 2009, she is the first Latina Supreme Court justice, renowned for her sharp questioning and passionate dissents. Born in the Bronx to Puerto Rican parents, her legal mind is razor sharp, and she's not one to suffer fools gladly. Her journey to the Supreme Court was truly remarkable. From housing projects in the South Bronx to Princeton University, then Yale Law School, where she served as editor of the Yale Law Journal. She worked as a prosecutor, a private attorney, and a federal judge before reaching the nation's highest court. Throughout her career, she's been known for asking the tough questions that other justices sometimes avoid. For over a decade, Sotomayor has served as the liberal conscience of the court, crafting fiery dissents on voting rights and immigration. She has maintained respect from the legal force's unprepared lawyers to adapt. Her opinions often include passionate language about justice and fairness that resonates far beyond legal circles. But today, she wasn't facing a nervous lawyer. She was facing Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. At 43, Jasmine Crockett embodies the new generation of Democratic leadership. The Texas Congresswoman burst onto the national scene with fearless committee questioning and viral social media moments. A former public defender and civil rights attorney, Crockett is no stranger to courtrooms, though never one quite like this. Her rise in politics has been meteoric. After earning her law degree from the University of Houston Law Center, she spent years as a public defender, fighting for clients who couldn't afford high-powered attorneys. This experience profoundly shaped her understanding of how the legal system impacts ordinary Americans, knowledge that would prove crucial in today's confrontation. Representing Texas's 30th congressional district, which includes parts of Dallas, she is known for her sharp wit, cutting through political nonsense, and calling out anyone she believes is wrong. Her background as a trial lawyer means she's comfortable with confrontation, and her social media savvy has made her one of Congress's most followed members. During her time in Congress, she has gained national attention for her performances in committee hearings, where she has grilled everyone from corporate executives to government officials with laser-focused questioning. Her viral moments have made her a favorite among young progressive voters, who see her as someone willing to fight the establishment. She's built her reputation on speaking truth to power, whether that power wears conservative suits or liberal robes. The case at hand was Henderson versus Texas, a crucial voting rights case that could reshape congressional redistricting nationwide. As a House Judiciary Committee member, Crockett had been granted the rare privilege of presenting oral arguments alongside DOJ lawyers, a move that already raised eyebrows among court traditionalists. The stakes couldn't have been higher. The court's ruling could either protect voting rights for millions or grant state distinguished service. I have to disagree. The collective intake of breath from the gallery was audible. Had a sitting congresswoman just told a Supreme Court justice she was wrong? Crockett stepped slightly closer to the podium, her posture straightening. You said personal stories have no place here. But wasn't it personal stories that shaped this court's greatest decisions? Wasn't it the personal story of Linda Brown that led to Brown versus Board? Wasn't the personal story of Clarence Gideon that established the right to counsel? Justice Sotomayor's face was unreadable, but her knuckles were white as she gripped her pen. Crockett pressed on. Justice Sotomayor, your own confirmation hearings were filled with personal stories about your diabetes, about your mother's strength, about how your personal experiences would inform your judicial philosophy. Were those stories irrelevant to your fitness for this court? The chamber was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. Even Chief Justice Roberts, usually quick to maintain order, seemed frozen by the unprecedented nature of what was unfolding. But Crockett wasn't finished. Furthermore, Crockett continued, her voice now carrying the full authority of her position as an elected representative. I would respectfully remind this court that I'm not just a lawyer arguing a case. I'm a member of Congress representing 760,000 Americans who sent me here to speak for them. She gestured toward the gallery, where several of her constituents sat watching. Those people don't have law degrees from Yale or Princeton. They can't cite constitutional precedents from memory. But they know when their rights are being violated, and they elected me to be their voice, even in this chamber. Justice Sotomayor leaned forward, clearly preparing to respond. But Crockett held up a respectful hand. Your Honor, if this court believes that the lived experiences of American citizens are irrelevant to constitutional interpretation, then perhaps it's time to ask whether this court is still connected to the people it serves. The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't yet exploded. A sitting congresswoman had just questioned the Supreme Court's connection to the American people directly to Justice Sotomayor's face. Chief Justice Roberts finally found his voice. Congresswoman Crockett, please confine your remarks to the legal issues before the court. But the damage was done. In less than 2 minutes, Jasmine Crockett had turned a judicial rebuke into a fundamental challenge to how the Supreme Court operates, and Justice Sotomayor looked like she'd just been slapped. What happened next would be analyzed and debated for years to come. Justice Sotomayor, one of the most experienced jurists on the court, found herself in a position she'd never faced before, being publicly challenged not just on law, but on the fundamental philosophy of judicial decision-making. The justice leaned back in her chair, her dark eyes studying Crockett with an intensity that made several people in the gallery shift uncomfortably. When she finally spoke, her voice carried decades of judicial authority. Congresswoman Crockett, Sotomayor said slowly, are you suggesting that this court's commitment to constitutional law should be subordinated to popular sentiment? It was a loaded question, designed to force Crockett into an impossible position. Say yes, and she'd be advocating for mob rule. Say no, and she'd have to back down from her previous statements. But Crockett had spent her career handling loaded questions from hostile judges and opposing attorneys. Elon Musk, the world's richest man, believed he could silence Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett with a simple lawsuit threat. With billions in the bank and an army of lawyers, he sent a cease and desist letter, fully expecting the Texas Democrat to back down from her pointed criticism of his government contracts. But what unfolded next shocked everyone, including Musk himself. When Crockett's lawyer fired back with a response, it wasn't merely a legal document. It was a devastating counterattack, a nuclear bomb that exposed everything Musk desperately wanted to keep hidden. The tech billionaire, usually so dominant and confident on Twitter, suddenly went silent. Then came the frantic phone calls, the private messages, and finally, something no one ever anticipated, Elon Musk begging for mercy. What began as Musk flexing his immense legal muscles morphed into the most humiliating legal beatdown of his career. All because he severely underestimated a congresswoman from Dallas who refused to be bullied by anyone, not even the richest man on earth. Before we dive into this incredible story, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of these explosive political showdowns. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. Elon Musk commands a financial empire valued at over $200 billion. As the CEO of Tesla, SpaceX, and the owner of X, formerly Twitter, he's accustomed to getting his way. When politicians dare to criticize his companies or question his lucrative government contracts, Musk's playbook is standard: unleash his formidable legal team and mobilize his massive social media following to crush any opposition. SpaceX alone benefits from billions in NASA contracts, and his Starlink satellite network has become indispensable for military communications. Tesla, meanwhile, reaps billions from government subsidies and tax breaks. Immediately swarmed Crockett's social media, flooding her accounts with accusations of being anti-innovation and jealous of success. The hashtag Dark Crockett Lies began trending, with thousands of accounts echoing the same talking points. But Musk wasn't finished. Over the next 48 hours, he posted a series of increasingly aggressive tweets. Some politicians think they can say anything without consequences.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I sat and listened to the beginning of this debate, my heart simply broke. And many people know me for being able to do alliterations, and all I could think about was amnesia allows adolescent accountability avoidance agility from across the aisle. So Work with me for a second. Imagine being a young man born to Jamaican and Panamanian parents who messed up not once, but twice. Imagine standing in front of a judge with your whole future hanging in the balance, and instead of prison, you are given a promise of mercy. Your record gets wiped clean. You get a second chance at life. Now imagine taking that promise and turning it into promotion. You go to college, you get a job, and even become a member of Congress. That's what redemption looks like. That's what America is supposed to be about. And that is exactly the story of the next wannabe governor from Florida. As a young man, he went through pretrial diversion for misdemeanor marijuana possession. As an adult, yet younger than 24, he was charged with and ultimately placed on probation for felony bribery charges, which ultimately were 2 expunged. He was given a 3rd chance, and now he's the face of a bill that would not afford young people in Washington, D.C. the same opportunities afforded to him. Let me be real. If he had grown up under Donald Trump's America or under the very D.C. crime bill he's pushing today, he wouldn't be standing here as a member of Congress. He'd still be living with the weight of those charges. So let's call this what it is, opportunities for me, but not for thee. He climbed the ladder of redemption, and now he's yanking it right up from the D.C. youth. See, most of us were taught to lift as you climb, but clearly some have forgotten to lift as they climb, and now they are committed to telling the next generation to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. I will not sit quiet while a man who was saved by grace turns around and tries to snatch grace away from others. If we're going to be real about crime, about communities,
time
about...
has expired.
I'd like to yield for an additional minute, please.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
About second chances and even third chances, then it needs to start with us looking in the mirror and remembering that even the author of this bill has a story too before he tries to lecture DC on safety. And it would be complete hypocrisy to have, hypothetically, someone convicted of 34 felonies to lecture DC on what to do with youthful offenders who have been scientifically shown not to have fully developed brains under the age of 25, especially if said multi-count convicted felon was in his 70s when he was convicted. What would be his excuse? Because his brain would be fully developed. And with that, I will yield back.
When Representative Jasmine Crockett stood up during the debate over the D.C. crime bill, she didn't just speak. She held up a mirror to the entire chamber. She began by reminding us that the man pushing this bill wasn't always the polished politician we see today. He was once a young man who made serious mistakes, not once, but twice. And yet, instead of being buried by those mistakes, he was granted something rare in the justice system: mercy. First, he was caught with marijuana and allowed to avoid prison through pretrial diversion. Then, he was charged with felony bribery. That, too, was resolved with probation and later wiped from his record. 2 strikes, 2 second chances. And what did he do with them? He rebuilt. He went to college. He built a life. And eventually, he found himself elected to Congress. That is the very definition of redemption. That is what the American justice system claims to believe in. That people can change. That they can turn their lives around if given a chance. But Crockett's outrage was that this same man, who owes his career to second chances, is now championing legislation that would deny that grace to others. She asked the obvious but uncomfortable question: if his own bill had applied to him, would he even be standing here today? The answer is almost certainly no, and that's where the hypocrisy becomes impossible to ignore. It's not just about policy differences. It's about who deserves forgiveness and who doesn't. It's about how some people get the benefit of the doubt, while others, often poor, often black or brown, often from places like D.C., are given only punishment. Crockett captured that hypocrisy in a phrase that cuts straight to the bone: opportunities for me, but not for thee. He climbed the ladder of redemption, she said, but instead of extending his hand to pull others up, he yanked the ladder away. This is where her words moved from politics to print.
I want to ask you about that in 1 second, but I do want to start. First of all, welcome. Thank you for being here. With the New York Times reporting that the DOJ closed an investigation into the president's border czar, Tom Homan, after he allegedly accepted a bag of cash from undercover FBI agents. Now, it should say the FBI director and the deputy attorney general say they found no evidence of wrongdoing. You're a member of the House Oversight Committee. Are you going to try to get information about the investigation?
This is absolutely something that not only oversight but judiciary should look into, and I sit as the ranking member on the subcommittee for judiciary that is oversight. So this is something that me and my team are definitely going to look into, and hopefully the chairman of that subcommittee is interested in finding out what the truth is, because that is what we are really supposed to do. We are not supposed to figure out who is best friends with the president, and if they are closely aligned with him, then just ignore things while trying to make up things about political.
Today, the Republican House majority brought to the floor a resolution honoring, quote, honoring the life and legacy of Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk's assassination was a horrific and vile attack and incident of political violence. And condemning the depravity of Kirk's brutal murder is a straightforward matter, one that is especially important to help stabilize an increasingly unsafe and volatile political environment where everyday people feel more at risk. We can deeply disagree and come together as a country to denounce the horror of this killing. And it is not a license for the abuse of power and whitewashing of American history. Today's resolution only underscores the majority's recklessness by choosing to author this condemnation and honoring on a purely partisan basis, instead of uniting Congress in this tragedy with one of the many bipartisan options to condemn political violence and Kirk's murder, as we did with the late Melissa Hortman. Instead, the majority proceeded with a resolution that brings great pain to the millions of Americans who endured segregation, Jim Crow, and the legacy of bigotry today. We should be clear about who Charlie Kirk was. A man who believed that the Civil Rights Act that granted Black Americans the right to vote was a mistake. Who, after the violent attack on Paul Pelosi, claimed that, quote, some amazing patriot, unquote, should bail out his brutal assailant. And accused Jews of controlling, quote, not just the colleges, it's the nonprofits, it's the movies, it's Hollywood, it's all of it, unquote. His rhetoric and beliefs were ignorant, uneducated, and sought to disenfranchise millions of Americans, far from the working tirelessly to promote unity, unquote, asserted by the majority in this resolution. It is equally important that Congress does unite to reject the government's attempt to weaponize this moment into an all-out assault on free speech across the country, all in the name of Charlie Kirk. President Trump and the FCC are now cynically threatening to shut down ABC and any outlets who give airtime to the administration's political critics. This is a disgusting attack on the American people and the very First Amendment rights that define us as a country. It is also the ABC Corporation's responsibility to refuse to embolden and participate in this corruption and escalation of censorship. We continue to pray for Mr. Kirk's family and loved ones in the wake of this terrible act. I am thinking especially of his children and his wife, whose grief cannot be measured. And with that, I yield back to the gentleman.